After my divorce made headlines, I received a wedding invitation from the woman who had destroyed me. My ex-wife, Arabella Voss, was marrying Sebastian Veil, the billionaire she had left me for. Then I made a decision that would change everything. I would go, but I would not go alone. I asked a homeless woman living outside my building in Chelsea to be my date. I wanted to shock Arabella. I had no idea what was coming. I had built 17 hotels across the South Coast before I reached my prime. I had closed deals in boardrooms where men twice my age could not keep up. I had survived a father who drank himself to death and a childhood where dinner meant whatever was left in the cupboard. None of that had prepared me for the morning Arabella walked into our living room, set her ring on the counter, and told me she was leaving. Not for another man, she said, but for a better life. You gave me comfort, Tristan, but Sebastian gives me a future. Sebastian Veil. The name still burned like acid in the back of my throat. A tech billionaire whose net worth made my hotel empire look like a lemonade stand. Arabella had met him at a charity gala, the kind I hated attending. Soon after, she had filed for divorce. The tabloids devoured the story. Hotel King loses queen to tech titan. I remembered reading that headline in an underground car park, sitting in my car, unable to start the engine. I did not cry. I simply sat there, staring at the steering wheel, feeling something inside me go numb. The period that followed was a blur of work and silence. I threw myself into expansion the way a drowning man grabs at anything solid. I opened a new property in Brighton. I restructured my management team. I slept at the office more nights than I slept at home. People around me said I was handling it well. They had no idea. Every morning I woke with the same thought. I was not enough. Not rich enough, not powerful enough, not whatever it was Arabella needed me to be. I told myself I no longer cared, but the truth was simpler and uglier. I cared so much it had eaten me hollow. Then the invitation arrived. Thick, cream-colored paper with gold-embossed letters. The wedding of Arabella Voss and Sebastian Veil. I stood in my kitchen, holding that envelope like it was a grenade with the pin already pulled. The handwritten note inside, the one about having no hard feelings, was either an act of mercy or the cruelest thing she had ever done to me. I could not tell which. I set the invitation on the counter right where she had once placed her ring, and for several days I did not touch it. Eventually I picked it up again. I read the date, the venue, a private estate in the Cotswolds, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, something colder. I was going. Not because I wanted to see Arabella happy, not because I had forgiven her. I was going because I refused to be the man people pitied. The ex-husband who stayed home licking his wounds while his replacement toasted champagne. I would show up. I would look her in the eye, and I would make sure she understood that losing me was not a victory. But I needed something more. A presence beside me that no one would expect. Someone who would make Arabella look twice, make the guests whisper, make the whole room shift its attention away from the bride. I did not want another socialite on my arm. Arabella would see through that in seconds. I wanted something unpredictable, something real enough to rattle her. I just did not know what that looked like yet. I found it one evening. I was walking into my building after a late dinner, jacket slung over my arm, when I noticed the woman sitting on the steps. She had been there for some time, but I had never really looked at her before. Most residents walked past her the way they walked past fire hydrants. She was part of the scenery. But that evening, something made me stop. She was reading, not a newspaper, not a magazine, an actual hardcover book balanced on her knees under the glow of the lobby light spilling through the glass doors. Her clothes were worn and layered, her hair pulled back with a rubber band. Yet the way she held that book, carefully, like it mattered, caught me off guard. Her name was Freya Dalton, though I would not learn that for another few minutes. She looked up when my shadow crossed her page. Most people in her position would have flinched or apologized or moved aside. Freya did none of those things. She simply looked at me with calm, steady eyes and said, "You are blocking my light." There was no hostility in it, no performance, just a woman stating a fact. I stepped to the side without thinking, and then, for reasons I could not explain, I sat down on the step next to her. We talked for some time. Freya had studied art at a college up north before a series of events, a lost scholarship, a sick mother, medical debt that swallowed everything, pulled the floor out from under her life. She did not tell me all of this at once. She told me in pieces between observations about the book she was reading and a joke about the doorman who always pretended not to see her. She was sharp. She was funny in a way that had no desperation in it. And she spoke about her situation without self-pity, as if being homeless was a problem she was working on, not a definition of who she was. I listened, and somewhere between her description of a Rothko painting she had once seen at the Tate Modern and her theory about why pigeons were the most honest animals in London, the idea landed in my head, fully formed, reckless, possibly insane. I turned to Freya and said, "I have a proposition for you." She raised an eyebrow. That is usually not a great opening line from a man in a £5,000 suit. I almost smiled. Then I told her about Arabella, about the wedding, about what I needed. I offered her £10,000 to be my date for one night. She would dress up, play the part of someone I was seeing, and help me walk into that wedding looking like a man who had moved on. A simple transaction. One evening, no strings. Freya stared at me for a long time, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Not greed, but assessment. She was deciding whether I was dangerous, delusional, or just sad. Finally, she closed her book and said, £10,000 to wear a dress and eat free food at a rich woman's wedding. I nodded. Freya tilted her head. You are out of your mind, but I will do it. We shook hands under the awning of my building, and the deal was set. I told her to meet me the following afternoon at my penthouse to start preparing. I would arrange clothes, shoes, a stylist if needed. I gave her my card and walked inside already planning the logistics. It felt good to have a plan. It felt like control, and control was the only thing that had kept me standing for some time. The next day, Freya showed up exactly on time. I had laid out options: dresses, shoes, accessories borrowed from a personal shopper I trusted. Freya walked through the penthouse slowly, looking at everything but touching nothing, like she was visiting a museum she had not paid admission to. When she finally spoke, she said, "You know this is crazy, right?" I handed her a garment bag. Probably. Freya unzipped it and pulled out an emerald green dress. She held it up against herself, looked in the mirror, and something flickered across her face. Not excitement, not gratitude, something older, like she was remembering a version of herself she had not seen in a long time. We spent the rest of the afternoon rehearsing. I went over the guest list, the likely questions, the backstory we would use. Freya absorbed it all quickly, but she pushed back when things felt false. "No one is going to believe I am a marketing consultant," she said. "I do not talk like a marketing consultant." I asked what she suggested. Freya thought about it. "Tell them I am an artist. It is close enough to the truth that I will not trip over it." I agreed. And in that small negotiation, something shifted between us. She was not a prop I was positioning. She was a person with instincts, and her instincts were good. By the time Freya left that evening, I felt something I had not felt in some time. Not hope exactly, but the faint outline of it. I told myself it was just the plan coming together, just the satisfaction of having a strategy. But when I replayed the afternoon in my head, the moments that stuck were not the logistics or the rehearsals. They were the way Freya had laughed when the backstory got too absurd, the way she had held that emerald green dress up to the mirror and for just a second let her guard down completely. I pushed the thought away. This was a transaction, nothing more. I repeated it to myself like a man trying to believe his own lie. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and adjusted my tie several times before accepting that my hands were shaking. I had not been nervous like this since the first hotel deal I ever closed. A crumbling property in Brighton that everyone told me to walk away from. I had bought it anyway, gutted it, rebuilt it, and turned it into the highest-rated boutique hotel on the seafront. That was who I was, a man who walked into rooms he was not supposed to be in and made them his. But today felt different. Today, I was not walking into a deal. I was walking into the wreckage of my old life, dressed in a suit with a woman I barely knew. Freya arrived at the penthouse at midday. She was wearing the emerald green dress, and when I opened the door, I almost did not recognize her. The stylist I had hired had done her work well. Freya's hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders. Her makeup was minimal but precise, and the dress fitted her like it had been sewn for her body alone. But it was not the clothes or the hair that stopped me in the doorway. It was the way she stood, back straight, chin level, like she had always belonged in places like this and was simply returning after a long absence. She caught me staring and said, "If you tell me I clean up nice, I'm walking out." In the car on the way to the Cotswolds, the mood shifted. The rehearsals, the jokes, the easy rhythm we had built over the past few days all gave way to silence. Freya sat on her side of the back seat, watching the motorway blur past the tinted windows, and I could see the tension gathering in her jaw. She was scared, not of the dress or the small talk or the champagne. She was scared of being seen, of walking into a room full of people who had never gone a day without a roof and being discovered as someone who slept on concrete. I understood that fear better than she knew. I had spent my entire career terrified that someone would look at me and see the boy who grew up eating cereal for dinner in a place he was ashamed to call home. I wanted to say something reassuring, but I did not. Freya was not the kind of woman who needed reassurance. She needed space to gather herself, and I gave it to her. We rode in silence for the remainder of the journey, and when the car turned onto the long gravel driveway of the estate, white tents, ivy-wrapped columns, a string quartet warming up near the garden, Freya let out a slow breath and said, "All right, let us go ruin her day." I looked at her. For the first time in some time, something close to a real smile crossed my face. The estate was everything Arabella would have wanted. Enormous, tasteful, designed to make every guest feel slightly underdressed. White roses lined the path to the reception. Waiters in black vests circulated with trays of champagne. The guest list was a catalogue of wealth: investors, tech executives, old money families whose names appeared on hospital wings and museum halls. I recognized most of them. I had once belonged to this world alongside Arabella. Now I was returning as the man she had discarded, and every polite smile directed my way carried the unspoken question, "Why are you here?" Near the head table, Sebastian Vale stood greeting guests with the smooth ease of a man who had bought his way into every room he had ever entered. He shook hands, clapped shoulders, and laughed at the right moments. When his eyes found mine across the lawn, he offered a brief nod, not hostile, not warm, the nod of a man who had already won and saw no reason to compete. Then they noticed Freya. It started as glances, quick, curious looks that lingered a beat too long. Freya walked beside me with her arm looped through mine, and she moved through the crowd with a kind of ease that money could not teach. She smiled at people. She made eye contact. When an older woman complimented her dress, Freya thanked her and asked about the brooch on the woman's collar, which turned out to be a 1940s estate piece from a grandmother in Bath. Within minutes, Freya had a small circle of guests around her, and I realized something that caught me completely off guard. She was not acting. She was just being herself in a nicer dress. Arabella saw us from across the reception lawn. I felt the moment her eyes landed on me and then moved to Freya. The expression on Arabella's face was brief but unmistakable. It was not anger, it was confusion. Arabella had expected me to show up alone, stiff and proud and barely holding it together. She had not expected this. A woman who glowed. A woman who was making her guests laugh. A woman whose hand rested on my arm with a familiarity that looked effortless. Arabella recovered quickly, she always did, and turned back to her conversation. But I saw the crack, and for one bitter, satisfying moment, it felt like enough. During the reception dinner, Freya sat next to me at a table near the back, far enough from the head table to be a clear social demotion, close enough to be watched. She handled it without flinching. When a hedge fund manager asked what she did, Freya told him she was an artist. He asked, "What medium?" "Whatever I can afford," she said, and the table laughed, assuming it was a joke about the art market. It was not a joke, but Freya delivered it with such timing and warmth that it landed perfectly. She talked about color theory with a gallery owner. She debated the difference between talent and discipline with a retired professor. She listened more than she spoke, but when she spoke, people leaned in. I watched all of this from beside her, and something inside me began to shift. A tectonic, slow-moving thing I could not name. I had brought Freya to this wedding as a weapon, a human chess piece designed to rattle my ex-wife. But sitting here watching her hold her own in a room that should have swallowed her whole, I felt the first crack in my plan. She was not a prop, she was not a punchline, she was the most genuinely impressive person at that table, and she had got here from a set of concrete steps outside my building in Chelsea. The shame of what I had done, reducing her to a transaction, settled into my chest like a weight I could not shift. The dancing started after the toasts. Sebastian had given a speech, polished, rehearsed, full of words like partnership and alignment that sounded more like a merger announcement than a declaration of love. The guests applauded politely. The band played something slow and elegant, and couples drifted onto the floor. I did not move. I had no intention of dancing, but Freya stood up, extended her hand, and said, "You did not pay me £10,000 to sit down all night." I took her hand on the dance floor. She was lighter than I expected, and she moved with a rhythm that did not come from lessons. It came from somewhere deeper. She laughed when I stepped on her foot. She spun once, caught herself, and the hem of the emerald green dress flared out like something from a painting. People were watching, not because she was doing anything extraordinary, but because she was having the kind of fun that no one else in the room seemed to remember how to have. That was when Arabella approached. The song had just ended, and Freya and I were still on the dance floor, catching our breath. Arabella appeared beside us in her white gown, champagne glass in hand, a smile on her face that I recognized instantly, the one she wore when she was about to draw blood. "Tristan," she said, her voice light and social, "I am so glad you came and your date is lovely. I have to say I did not expect you to move on so quickly." The emphasis on "move on" was precise. It was designed to remind everyone within earshot that I had been the one who was left. Before I could respond, Freya spoke. She turned to Arabella with a smile that held no malice and no retreat, and said, "He did not move on quickly. He moved on well. There is a difference." The words landed in the air between us like a stone in still water. Arabella's expression flickered. Freya continued, her voice steady and clear. "You left a man who builds things from nothing, who shows up when it is hard. That is not someone you move on from. That is someone extraordinary." She said it without performance, without volume. She said it like she meant every word because she did. I stood there, unable to speak. No one had ever described me that way. Not Arabella, not my business partners, not anyone. And hearing it from Freya, a woman who had no reason to flatter me, no stake in my ego, no incentive beyond the truth, broke something open inside me that I had kept sealed for some time. I looked at her, and for the first time the wedding, the revenge, the entire scheme fell away. All that was left was this woman in an emerald green dress who had just defended me with more conviction than anyone in my life ever had. The rest of the evening blurred. We danced again. We sat outside on the terrace and talked about things that had nothing to do with Arabella, about art, about whether London was a city that loved you back or just used you, about the books Freya had been reading under the streetlight outside my building. She was magnetic in a way that had nothing to do with the dress or the setting. She was magnetic because she was honest. And honesty in a room full of people performing their wealth was the most disruptive thing imaginable. But Arabella was not the kind of woman who let things go. While Freya and I sat on the terrace, Arabella had been watching. Something about Freya had nagged at her all evening. Not the charm, not the conversation, but something smaller, a flicker of recognition she could not place. And then it landed. She had seen this woman before, not at a gala, not at a dinner party, but on the pavement outside the building where Arabella had once lived with me. The woman with the layered clothes and the book on her knees sitting on the front steps like she had nowhere else to go. Arabella pulled out her phone, searched Freya's name, and found nothing. No social media, no professional profile, no trace of the artist Freya claimed to be. That was all the confirmation she needed. It happened on the rooftop where the after-party had moved as the night cooled. The view stretched across the Cotswolds hills, dark slopes, scattered lights, a sky full of stars that the city never let you see. Arabella stepped into the center of the group with the practiced ease of a woman who had hosted 100 events and said, loud enough for every guest to hear, "I just want to make sure everyone here knows who Tristan's lovely date really is." She turned to Freya. "You do not have a flat, do you, sweetheart? You do not even have an address." The rooftop went quiet. Every face turned toward Freya. I felt the ground shift beneath me, not physically, but in every way that mattered. This was the moment I had feared without knowing I feared it. The exposure, the humiliation, not of myself, but of her. I had brought Freya into this, and now she was standing in the center of a circle of strangers who were staring at her like she was a curiosity, a scandal, a joke. I opened my mouth to speak, to deny it, to redirect, but Freya was faster. She looked at Arabella. Then she looked at the guests, and in a voice that carried no tremor and no apology, she said, "She is right. I do not have a flat. I have been sleeping outside Tristan's building for some time. He asked me to come tonight, and he offered to pay me £10,000 to pretend to be his date. That is the truth. All of it." She let the words settle. No one moved. Freya looked directly at Arabella and added, "But everything I said about him tonight, that was free." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood on that rooftop exposed in front of every person whose opinion I had spent some time trying to protect, and felt the full weight of what I had done. I had used Freya. I had treated her like a costume I could put on to cover my wounds. And she, this woman who had nothing, who owed me nothing, had just stood in front of all of them and told the truth. Not to destroy me, not to save herself, because it was the only thing she knew how to do. The plan was dead. The scheme, the revenge, the carefully constructed illusion, all of it lay in pieces on the rooftop floor. I looked at Freya, and she looked back at me, and in her eyes I saw the question that would define everything that came next. "What are you going to do now?" I answered her with my feet. I did not speak. I did not try to explain or defend or spin the situation into something it was not. I simply walked across the rooftop, stood beside Freya, and faced the crowd. Not behind her, not in front of her, next to her. The guests watched me like they were waiting for a correction, a clarification, some version of events that would make sense inside the world they understood. I gave them none. I looked at Arabella, the woman I had once built a life around, the woman whose approval I had chased all the way to this rooftop, and said, "She told you the truth. I asked her to come tonight because I wanted to hurt you. That is on me, not on her." Arabella's face tightened. She had expected me to crumble, to stammer, to retreat into the shame she had laid out for me like a trap. But I was standing there, steady and exposed, with nothing left to hide behind. The silence on the rooftop stretched. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Sebastian Vale stood near the bar, swirling his glass, watching the scene with the same detached calm he had worn all evening, the expression of a man who measured every situation by whether it affected his bottom line. Arabella looked at her new husband, searching for support, and found only distance. Then she looked back at me, and for the first time that night, she had nothing to say. I turned to Freya. "I am sorry," I said. "Not for the crowd, not for performance." I said it the way a man says something when he finally hears his own voice clearly after months of noise. "I used you. I told myself it was a deal, a transaction, something clean. But I brought you here to make myself feel less broken. And I did not think about what that cost you." Freya held my gaze. She did not flinch, did not rush to make me feel better. She just listened. And in that listening, I understood something that would take me weeks to fully absorb. Freya had more dignity in that single moment of silence than I had shown in some time of scheming. We left the rooftop together. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a grand exit. We simply walked to the staircase and descended into the cool night air of the Cotswolds. Behind us, the party resumed awkwardly, quietly, the way parties do when something real has interrupted the performance. Freya and I walked across the gravel driveway toward the waiting car, and neither of us spoke until we reached it. Then Freya stopped, turned to me, and said, "For the record, I did not say those things about you for the money." I nodded. "I know." She studied my face as if measuring whether I actually understood. Then she got in the car. The drive back to London was nothing like the drive out. The tension was gone, replaced by something heavier and more honest. I stared out the window and replayed the night in my head. Not the humiliation, not Arabella's attack, but the moment Freya had called me extraordinary. I had spent some time believing that Arabella left because I was not enough. Not rich enough, not powerful enough, not whatever invisible currency the world demanded. But sitting in that car watching the motorway lights slide past, I realized the wound was not about Arabella at all. It never had been. The wound was older than her. It went all the way back to my childhood, to a version of myself that had decided his worth was something he had to earn, purchase, and prove every single day. Arabella had not created that belief. She had just confirmed it. And Freya, without trying, without strategy, without any reason to care, had torn it apart in a single sentence. When the car pulled up to my building, I reached into my jacket and took out an envelope. £10,000 in cash as promised. I held it out to Freya. She looked at it, then looked at me. "Keep it," she said. I shook my head. A deal is a deal. Freya took the envelope, opened it, counted the bills with the practiced hands of someone who understood exactly what money meant when you had none, and put it in her bag. Then she said something that surprised me. "I do not want you to save me, Tristan. I do not need a rescue. If this is going to be anything real, it starts with me standing on my own feet, not yours." I understood, and it cost me something to understand, because every instinct I had, the builder, the fixer, the man who solved problems by throwing resources at them, wanted to offer her a flat, a job, a shortcut out of the life she was living. But Freya was not a problem to be solved. She was a person who had been knocked down by circumstances that would have destroyed most people. And she was still standing, still reading books under streetlights, still sharp enough to hold a room full of millionaires, captive with nothing but her mind and her honesty. The least I could do was respect that. Over the following period, something happened that neither of us had planned. A guest at the wedding, the wife of the gallery owner Freya had spoken with during dinner, had recorded a short video of Freya dancing in the emerald green dress. The clip was only 30 seconds long. Freya spinning on the dance floor, laughing, the dress catching the light as the band played behind her. The woman posted it with a caption about "the most alive person at the most expensive wedding I have ever attended," and within days it had been shared thousands of times. People wanted to know who she was. The story, fragmented and mostly wrong, spread across social media. But the attention was real, and it reached people who mattered. A creative director at a design studio in Shoreditch saw the video and then heard the real story through a mutual connection. She reached out to Freya not out of charity, but because Freya's background in art, her eye for color, and her way of talking about visual work had been captured in a second clip from the same evening, a longer conversation at the dinner table that another guest had filmed. The job offer was modest, an assistant position at the studio, entry-level with room to grow. Freya took it the same day. She used part of the £10,000 for a deposit on a small flat in Hackney. The rest she put towards supplies. She told me about it over coffee the first time we met after the wedding, and her voice carried something I had never heard in it before. Not gratitude, possibility. For my part, I stopped trying to win. I stopped tracking Arabella's name in the press. I stopped replaying the divorce in my head, searching for the moment I could have been enough. I went back to my hotels, my work, my life. But something fundamental had changed. I no longer built things to prove a point. I built them because building was what I knew how to do. And for the first time, that felt like enough on its own. The weight inside my chest, the one that had been there since the morning Arabella set her ring on the counter, did not disappear, but it got lighter. Day by day, conversation by conversation, it got lighter. Sometime later, a small item appeared in a gossip column about tension between Arabella and Sebastian Vale. Something about a disagreement at a charity event, a public exchange that sources described as icy. I saw the headline on my phone, read the first 2 lines, and closed the app. It did not matter. It had never really mattered. What mattered was the text message on my screen from Freya. A photo of her first completed project at the studio, a set of hand-painted color samples arranged in a grid with 2 words beneath it. "Not bad," I typed back. "Extraordinary." I set the phone down and looked out the window of my office at the city below. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not feel like I needed to prove anything to anyone. The view was just a view. The buildings were just buildings. And somewhere across the river, in a small flat in Hackney, a woman who had once read books on my doorstep was building a life that no one had given her. She had built it herself, and that, more than any deal I had ever closed or any room I had ever walked into, was the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen. Reflecting on that memorable wedding in the Cotswolds, where Freya bravely stood by my side amid all the stares and whispers, I uncovered a truly valuable and deeply emotional life lesson that has touched my heart in ways I never anticipated. Following the heartbreak when Arabella abandoned me for Sebastian Vale, leaving me feeling utterly worthless even with my successful hotels dotted along the south coast, I made the mistake of pulling Freya, the resilient woman who had been living on the concrete steps outside my building in Chelsea, into a thoughtless scheme driven by revenge. However, her courageous decision to speak the unvarnished truth on the rooftop that evening became my greatest teacher, revealing that the real essence of life's value is not measured by power, money, or social standing, but by the inner courage to remain authentic and the quiet dignity that shines through even in the face of adversity. Her heartfelt words released me from the heavy,